Patrick Langley had just dropped off his last passenger when he saw her barefoot, drenched, and standing in the middle of Fifth Avenue like the world had just slapped her across the face. He tapped the brakes hard. "Hey, you okay?" She spun toward him, mascara streaked down her cheek, soaked curls clinging to her face. "Please," she said, breathless. "I need a ride, anywhere but here." Patrick looked at the back seat. It was already filled with his son's booster seat, a stack of overdue bills, and a leaky coffee thermos. He was late picking up Emmett from after-school care, and he didn't have time to play Uber Samaritan. But something in her voice urgent, cracked made him throw the cab into park and swing open the passenger door. "Hop in." She hesitated only a second before sliding into the seat, shaking from the cold rain. She smelled like roses and smoke, and her dress, what was left of it, looked like it cost more than his monthly rent. He pulled away from the curb. "Where to?" She swallowed hard. "Just drive, ma'am," he said, giving her a look. "I got a kid to pick up in 20 minutes. I can't be driving in circles." Her fingers curled into fists on her lap. "Then take me with you, please." He exhaled and glanced at her again. She didn't look dangerous, just destroyed. "You're lucky my kid's used to chaos," he muttered, turning east toward Emmett's school. They rode in silence, the only sound the squeak of the windshield wipers and her unsteady breathing. At her red light, she spoke. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have thrown myself into your car like that." Patrick shrugged. "You looked like you needed a way out." "I did," she said quietly. "Still do," he glanced at her. "Boyfriend, fiancé," she pressed her lips together. "Ex now, I caught him, celebrating our engagement with one of the junior associates." Patrick winced. "Ouch." "And then," she added, "my driver left me when I threw my ring at the guy's face. Said I could find my own way home. You rich types sure know how to throw a party." She let out a breath that was halfway to a laugh. "I guess we do." He pulled into the school parking lot just as Emmett came barreling out the front doors, backpack bouncing, his shaggy brown hair soaked. "Daddy," Patrick grinned and hopped out to open the back door. "Hey, champ." Emmett stopped short when he saw the woman in the front seat. "Who's that?" Patrick looked at her. "Good question." She turned, offered a hand over the seat. "I'm Morgan. Your dad rescued me." Emmett looked suspicious. "Are you a princess?" Morgan blinked. Not exactly." Patrick chuckled and helped him in. "All right, seatbelt, we're going home." Morgan sat quietly as Patrick drove through the wet streets toward his small apartment in Queens. When he pulled up to the cracked curb, she looked at him. "I can't go home tonight." Patrick rubbed his jaw. "Look, I don't know what kind of mess you're running from, but this ain't exactly the Ritz." "I don't care." Her voice was firm now. "Just let me stay somewhere that doesn't have glass walls and empty lies." Patrick sighed. "Fine. Couch one night, that's it. I'll pay you," she blurted. He frowned. "Don't insult me," she blinked. "I didn't mean I'm not a rescue mission for hire, Morgan." Her face softened. "I didn't mean it like that. I just—" She looked small suddenly. "Thank you." That night, while Emmett watched cartoons on the floor, Morgan sat on Patrick's worn-out couch in one of his old sweatshirts, her hair in a messy bun. She looked nothing like the woman who'd stepped into his cab hours earlier. "Is your mom around?" she asked softly. Patrick's face darkened. "Left when Emmett was 2, said motherhood wasn't for her." Morgan winced. "I'm sorry. Don't be. We're better off." She looked around the cramped apartment. "You always drive cab," Patrick shrugged. "Used to be a mechanic, laid off last year." "Cab's a way to keep food on the table." Morgan looked at him for a long moment. "You gave up your ride for me." "I didn't know you were rich," he said, half smiling. "I'm not just rich," she murmured. "I'm the CEO of Orla Tech." Patrick blinked. "Wait, like?" "The tech company with the smart watches." She nodded. He stared at her like she'd grown a second head. "You're lying." "I'm not." She stood and walked to her purse, pulling out a soaked, bent ID badge from under her wallet. "See," he took it, eyebrows raised. "Morgan Orla, CEO Orla Tech." He looked at her again, stunned. "So you're a billionaire?" "Technically, yes." She looked almost embarrassed. Patrick laughed once. "And you're sleeping on my couch," she smiled. "And I've never felt safer." The next morning, Patrick woke up to the smell of pancakes. He padded into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. Morgan stood at the stove in his sweatshirt, flipping pancakes like she belonged there. "I didn't know what cereal Emmett liked, so I figured pancakes were safe." Patrick stared at her. "You're a billionaire who cooks. I'm a woman who owes you more than I can explain." He stepped closer. You don't owe me anything. She turned, locking eyes with him. I think I do. Emmett ran in, grabbing a plate. This is the best day ever, Morgan laughed, handing him syrup. Glad to hear it. Patrick watched her, something shifting in his chest. He'd picked up a stranger in a storm. But now, watching her laugh with his son in his tiny kitchen, he couldn't help but wonder what if this wasn't just temporary. What if fate had just dropped something real into his lap? And what if he was crazy enough to believe it? The rain had stopped, but the air still clung with the heavy scent of wet pavement and something more electric. By the time Patrick returned from dropping Emmett off at school, Morgan was perched on the fire escape outside his kitchen window, legs tucked under her, staring out at the skyline like she was trying to memorize a life that wasn't hers. You're gonna freeze out there. She didn't turn. It's warmer than the boardroom. Patrick leaned against the windowsill. That sounds like a metaphor. It's not. My boardroom's always set to 66 degrees, keeps people alert, apparently. She finally looked at him. You ever feel like the more you build, the lonelier it gets? I don't build much, he said, folding his arms, but I fix things. Morgan studied him. That must be nice, fixing something and knowing it's better because of you. You're not exactly broken, Morgan, she gave a faint laugh. You don't know me. Maybe not. He reached out a hand. But I know what it's like to want everything to stop moving for a second. She took his hand and let him pull her inside, brushing her fingertips against his for just a second too long. They spent the afternoon navigating a quiet tension neither of them addressed. Patrick had errands to run, and Morgan insisted on tagging along, swapping sleek stilettos for worn sneakers she found in a closet. She didn't flinch walking into the corner laundromat, didn't wrinkle her nose in the bodega where the clerk called Patrick by name and handed him a bag of overripe bananas for free. You're kind of famous here, she said, balancing a loaf of bread against her hip. Takes a lot less to impress people when you're not pretending. Morgan tilted her head. Is that a dig at me? Patrick shrugged. You tell me, she grinned. I'll let it slide, for now. Later, while he sorted laundry, she leaned against the dryer, arms crossed. What would you do if you didn't have to worry about bills? He paused, a sock in each hand. You mean like dream? Yes, he dropped the socks into the basket. Open my own garage, not just repairs, restorations, classic cars, the kind people forget about. She studied him. Why haven't you? He looked up, one brow raised. You ever tried opening a business with less than $50 in your account? Her eyes softened. No, I haven't. That's the difference then. She didn't say anything for a while. Then quietly, I like the way you see the world. Patrick didn't answer. He wasn't sure he trusted what he felt when she looked at him like that. That night, she cooked again. This time, it was pasta, nothing fancy, but the way she moved in his kitchen like she'd done it 100 times before made something stir in his chest. He didn't know what to do with that feeling, so he focused on drying dishes while she hummed under her breath. You always hum when you cook, he asked. Only when I'm not terrified. He looked over. What are you terrified of? Morgan set the wooden spoon down. That when I go back, everything will be right where I left it, as if I never left. As if I never mattered. He dried his hands and leaned against the counter. Then don't go back. She turned toward him. You think I can just walk away from everything I built? I think you already did. She stepped closer. It doesn't feel like enough. Patrick met her gaze. Maybe it's not about what you built. Maybe it's about what you want to be. Morgan looked at him like he'd peeled away a layer no one had dared touch. Then she whispered, what if I don't know what that is anymore? He hesitated, then said, then stay until you figure it out. The silence between them turned heavier but not uncomfortable. Charged, she didn't move, neither did he. It was Emmett's voice from the hallway that broke the spell. Can I have dessert? Morgan laughed, turning away. Only if you promise to brush your teeth twice. Patrick watched her walk away, the sound of her laughter still echoing in his chest. The next morning she was gone. Patrick found a note on the counter, written on the back of an old receipt. Just needed air. Back soon. But she didn't come back that day. Or the next. By the third morning, he'd stopped checking the street outside his window. He told himself it didn't matter, that she wasn't his responsibility. That she had a life waiting for her, and this, whatever this had become, was never meant to last. But when Emmett asked where she was, Patrick didn't have an answer. A week passed. Then two. And just when Patrick had started to convince himself that she'd been a glitch in the system, a temporary misfire in the routine of his life, he walked out of the grocery store and nearly dropped the bag of apples he was carrying. There she was on the sidewalk, wearing a navy coat and oversized sunglasses. "Morgan," she pulled off the sunglasses. Her eyes were tired but lit with something fierce. "I need your help," she said. He blinked. "You disappear for 2 weeks and now you need help. I know how it sounds. But I'm serious." He set the groceries down slowly. "What's going on? I walked into the boardroom yesterday and found a proposal on my desk. One I didn't approve. They're planning to sell the company, my company." Patrick stared at her. "Can they do that? Not legally." "But they're trying to force my hand, using a clause I missed when we merged with a European partner last year." She stepped closer. "I need someone who doesn't owe them anything. Someone who can look at the contract and tell me what they see." "And you thought of your cab driver?" "I thought of the man who sees through lies, who fixes things," he exhaled. "Morgan, I'm not a lawyer, no, but you're honest. And right now, I don't have a single person in my life I can say that about." He watched her as the wind swept her hair across her face. She looked nothing like the woman he'd first met. There was grit beneath the elegance now, and desperation threaded with trust. "All right," he said. "But you're buying lunch," she smiled. "Deal." That afternoon, they sat side by side in a corner booth of a hole-in-the-wall diner, papers spread out between them. Patrick read slowly, methodically, lips moving as he traced every line. Morgan watched him, not interrupting once. Finally, he pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. "Here, this clause only activates if the majority shareholder is absent for 30 consecutive days. You were gone for 13, her eyes widened. "So they jumped the gun," he nodded. "They counted on you not reading it yourself." Morgan laughed, a sound full of disbelief. "They're going to lose their minds." Patrick leaned back. "You're going to let them?" "No." She reached across the table and touched his hand. "I'm going to show them exactly who they've underestimated." When she looked at him next, there was something new in her expression. Not just gratitude, admiration, maybe more, and Patrick knew, without saying a word, that everything between them had shifted again. "You're sure about this?" Patrick stood just outside the revolving doors of Orla Tech's headquarters, holding the folder Morgan had handed him less than 5 minutes ago. He wore a blazer 2 sizes too small that Morgan had pulled from her driver's trunk on the way over, claiming it belonged to one of her ex-security consultants who'd never come back for it. Morgan adjusted the collar of his shirt with careful fingers. "I trust you." "That doesn't sound like a smart move." She looked up at him, her tone steady. "You already saw what their lawyers missed. That's more than I can say for the last 3 people I paid 6 figures for." Inside, the lobby gleamed with silver and glass. Everyone they passed wore sharp suits and sharper gazes, but when Morgan entered, the atmosphere shifted. Phones paused mid-ring. Conversations stilled. Even the receptionist stood a little straighter. Patrick followed her through the executive floor like a fish out of water, trying not to stare at the exposed chrome beams or the massive digital art screens cycling through branded campaigns. She didn't slow down or glance back. She was in full command until they reached the boardroom. A man in a dark gray suit stood at the head of the table, flanked by a half-circle of well-dressed executives. His smile was polished to a perfect, insincere sheen. "Ah, Morgan, you finally decided to reappear." She didn't return the smile. "Cut the theatrics, Pierce." His eyes flicked to Patrick. "And who's this?" "Your new legal counsel." Patrick stepped forward before she could answer. "I'm here to clarify a document error, one that invalidates your petition to trigger Clause 19. Pierce's jaw tightened. "You're joking." Patrick opened the folder and set it on the table. "You filed this under the assumption that Morgan was absent for 30 days, but the clause stipulates business inactivity, not physical absence. She signed off on international payroll adjustments last Thursday. That counts as an executive action." One of the other board members leaned in, scanning the page. "He's right." Pierce's smile faltered. "That edit wasn't in the original draft." Morgan folded her arms. "No, you conveniently buried the update in the footnotes when you tried to rewrite the bylaws during the merger. I guess you assumed I'd be too distracted to notice." Pierce's voice dropped. You're making a mistake, Morgan. I already did, she said. I trusted you. Then she turned to the woman seated beside him. Karen, I'd like a full audit of Pierce's communications with our partners in Zurich, effective immediately. Karen nodded without hesitation. Pierce stood, his face pale. You can't do that. Morgan's voice cut through him like silk over steel. I just did. By the time they exited the building, the wind had picked up, tugging strands of hair across her cheek. Patrick handed back the folder, still stunned by the way she dismantled an entire power play without losing her composure. That was. He shook his head. Honestly, I've never seen anything like that, she exhaled. It felt like walking through fire. But I wasn't alone. Their eyes met, and for the first time since they'd met, the silence between them wasn't filled with uncertainty, it was humming with something unspoken and dangerous. Later that night, they returned to Patrick's apartment. Emmett was already asleep, curled up with a new dinosaur book Morgan had brought back from her office's gift shop. Patrick poured them each a glass of the cheap red wine he'd been saving for nothing in particular. Morgan sat on the windowsill, legs tucked beneath her, cradling the glass like it was anchoring her. You know what I realized in there? She asked without looking at him. What? I don't want to go back, she said. Not to the way things were. Not to that version of me. He leaned against the wall, watching her. What happens if you walk away? I lose everything I built, but maybe that's not such a loss if I don't recognize it anymore. She took a sip and set the glass down. I used to think power meant control. But it's just another kind of cage. You don't have to prove anything to me. She turned toward him. But I want to. Patrick stepped closer. Why? Because you see me without the title, without the headlines. And for the first time in years, I don't feel like I have to perform. His heartbeat kicked up as he reached out, brushing his thumb along her cheekbone. You don't. She didn't pull away. He kissed her. It wasn't tentative or cautious. It was the kind of kiss that burned away every question they'd both been too afraid to ask. When they finally broke apart, her breath caught against his jaw. I've been trying not to do that for days, she whispered. I stopped trying yesterday. She laughed quietly, resting her forehead against his. I don't know what this is, Patrick, but I want it. Me too. They didn't sleep that night, not in the usual sense. They lay tangled on the couch, talking quietly, fingers brushing over shared stories they hadn't yet told. She told him about the first time she'd pitched Orla Tech in a coffee shop with $3,000 in her savings and a prototype built from spare parts. He told her about the way his father taught him to fix engines under a tarp in a backyard with no grass. Neither of them asked what came next, but both of them were thinking it. By morning, the apartment felt different, lighter. Morgan made breakfast while Patrick packed Emmett's lunch. The three of them ate together like they'd done it for years, not days. But before she could leave for the office, her phone buzzed on the counter. She glanced at the screen, then frowned. What is it? Patrick asked. She hesitated. My legal team just forwarded an email. The Zurich partner filed an injunction to freeze my shares. They're trying to strip my voting rights. Patrick stood still. Can they do that? They can try. Her fingers tightened around her phone. They're betting on me being too distracted to fight. They're wrong. She looked up. Whatever they throw at you, he said, we'll figure it out. Morgan stared at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, like she'd just decided something irreversible. That afternoon, she called an emergency press conference from the rooftop of Orla Tech's headquarters. Patrick stood behind the cameras, arms crossed, watching her step up to the podium in a fitted navy suit that made her look like she could command the world. But her voice was calm, clear, unshakable. I built this company from nothing, she said. And I won't let it be stolen by those who mistake silence for surrender. She laid out the entire manipulation in precise terms. The clause, the attempted takeover, the injunction, and then she did something no one expected. I've spent years chasing perfection, she said, but I forgot what it meant to build something real, something that matters. She paused, her eyes finding Patrick in the crowd, and I'm done letting fear dictate my future. Orla Tech's next chapter will look different. And so will mine. The crowd erupted in questions as she stepped down, but she didn't stop to answer them. She walked straight to Patrick. You're part of that next chapter, she said. I figured, she smiled. But I'm not asking you to fit into my life. I want to build something new with you. And Emmett, especially Emmett, he's the best part. He took her hand. Then let's build it. The elevator doors opened behind them, and this time she didn't walk back into her world alone. Patrick stepped off the elevator into the penthouse suite and felt immediately out of place. The floor beneath his boots wasn't carpet. It was some kind of imported marble that caught the light from the floor to ceiling windows and threw it back in golden shards. The walls were covered in abstract art that didn't make sense, but probably cost more than anything he'd ever owned. A grand piano sat untouched in the corner, and a chandelier hung above them that looked like it belonged in a palace. Morgan crossed the space barefoot, pulling her hair into a low ponytail, her blouse half untucked like she hadn't realized she was still wearing it. Sorry about the mess. My assistant's out sick and I haven't bothered keeping this place in order. Patrick looked around. If this is a mess, I'm afraid to see what you'd call chaos, she laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. I don't stay here much anymore. It doesn't feel like home. Why bring me here? He asked. She paused in front of the massive window overlooking the city. The skyline bled orange and coral, the sun dipping behind the towers like it had somewhere better to be. Because I need to show you something. Patrick waited, arms folded, as she walked over to a shelf and pulled down a leather-bound binder. She set it on the glass coffee table and opened it, revealing papers covered in sketches, notes, and diagrams. I've been working on this for over a year, she said. It's a new division of Orla Tech 1 that would provide low-cost vehicle diagnostic tools for independent mechanics. No subscriptions, no corporate contracts, just accessible tech. Patrick leaned in, flipping through the pages. This is smart. It's not just smart, she said. It's personal. I designed it for people like you. He looked up. You mean the ones who don't own penthouses? I mean the ones who still fix things with their hands and don't get handed shortcuts. He closed the binder. Why are you showing me this now? Because I want you to run it. Patrick blinked. Come again. The division launches next quarter. I need someone who understands what it's like in real garages, someone who won't let the tech get so complicated it stops being useful. I'm not a corporate guy, Morgan. You'd run it how you wanted. Build your own team. I already talked to our board, and they're on board reluctantly. He stared at her like she just suggested he pilot a rocket. You're offering me an executive job. I'm offering you a chance to build something that matters, with full funding, full autonomy, and no strings attached. He paced away from her, rubbing the back of his neck. You realize a month ago I was driving your soaked, furious self through Queens in a cab that stalled every other turn. I remember. And now you're offering me a job that probably pays more in a week than I made in a year. You don't have to say yes. He turned, eyes sharp. That's not the problem. The problem is I want to. She stepped forward. Then take it. He looked at her, really looked at her. You're serious about this? About us? I've never been more serious about anything. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides and kissed her, deep and certain, like it was the only answer he had left. When they pulled apart, her fingers were tangled in his shirt and his heart was hammering. I'm not going to pretend I know how to navigate your world, he said. Then we'll build a new one. The next few weeks moved like a whirlwind. Morgan's legal team crushed the injunction under a mountain of evidence, and the Zurich partner retreated without another word. The scandal leaked to the press, but Morgan managed the fallout with a single televised interview, one where she named names, refused to spin the truth, and walked away with the company's stock rising higher than it had in a year. Patrick, meanwhile, found himself in meetings with engineers, designers, and logistics experts. He wore a suit that actually fit, learned how to decipher corporate spreadsheets, and insisted on hiring a team of local mechanics who'd never touched a resume but knew engines better than most consultants ever would. He didn't move into the penthouse. Instead, Morgan spent more time at his place cooking with Emmett, replanting the sad, crooked fern in the kitchen window, and helping organize the garage Patrick had finally rented with her startup capital. It wasn't just business. It was becoming a life. One afternoon, Emmett came home from school and headed straight for the garage, where Patrick was elbow-deep in a vintage El Camino engine and Morgan was labeling storage bins. Dad, Emmett said. Are you and Morgan married yet? Patrick blinked. No, buddy. Why? Because she already lives here and she makes the best grilled cheese, and she doesn't yell when I spill stuff. Morgan tried not to laugh. Patrick looked at her, then back at his son. Well, those are solid reasons, he said. Later that night, after Emmett had fallen asleep on the couch with a blanket over his legs and a half-eaten bowl of popcorn on his chest, Patrick found Morgan on the fire escape, watching the stars. I never asked, he said, slipping his arms around her from behind. Why Orla Tech? She leaned back into him. It was my mother's name. She used to fix toasters and blenders when I was little. People didn't have money to replace things, so she'd repair them for free half the time. Patrick rested his chin on her shoulder. You kept her name alive. I'm trying. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. She froze. Patrick. He opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring with a thin band carved to look like tree bark, a tiny sapphire set in the center. It's not a diamond, he said. And I know it's not from some luxury boutique, but it's what I could afford myself, and I wanted the first thing I gave you to be mine. Tears welled in her eyes. Will you marry me? She nodded before she could even get the words out. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't extravagant, but it was real. A month later, they held the wedding in the garage, not a hotel ballroom, not a rooftop gala, the garage. The floors were swept clean, strings of lights hung from the rafters, and a makeshift altar stood between two classic cars, one hers, one his. Emmett served as best man and ring bearer, wearing a navy blazer 3 sizes too big. Morgan wore a white jumpsuit and oil-smudged sneakers. Patrick wore a black shirt with the sleeves rolled up and grease under his fingernails. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Emmett shouted, "Only if I don't get cake." And when they kissed, the entire room erupted in cheers. Friends, family, co-workers, mechanics, neighbors, and even the bodega clerk who had no idea what was going on but showed up with a tray of empanadas anyway. After the ceremony, Morgan pulled Patrick aside, away from the crowd. You know what I realized today? She asked. What's that? You didn't just save me that night. You gave me a chance to become someone I actually like. He cupped her face in his hands. You were always that person. You just needed someone to remind you. She kissed him again, soft and slow, as the garage lights twinkled above them and the music drifted through the open doors. They didn't need marble floors or private jets or designer labels. They had something better, something earned, something real. And it was only just beginning. The first time Patrick walked into the new Orla Tech division with his name on the blueprints, it didn't feel like success. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing, for once, he wasn't scared to jump. The walls were still half-painted, the desks only partially assembled, and the floor plan looked nothing like the sterile offices upstairs. Instead of sleek corporate symmetry, the space had been designed like a garage. Open bays, exposed beams, and a wall of tools mounted with military precision. It smelled faintly of fresh paint, sawdust, and something electric. He took a deep breath, then set down a box of wrenches on the central work table. Morgan walked in behind him, her heels clicking once before she slipped them off and padded barefoot across the concrete. You're really doing it, she said, spinning slowly to take in the space. You built this. Not yet, Patrick said, but we're close. She tilted her head. You've been working late. I know because you haven't met me at the taco truck all week. Had to make sure every damn bolt was in the right place. He turned to her. Besides, I didn't want you to see it until I had the nameplate up. She followed his gaze to the brass sign mounted above the entrance. It read, Langley Automotive Innovations, powered by Orla Tech. Her breath caught. You could have called it anything. I didn't want to. She stepped forward and curled her fingers into his shirt. I love that you didn't. Later that night, they sat on the roof of the building, sharing lukewarm noodles out of takeout boxes. The city below stretched out like a circuit board, pulsing with life, but for once, neither of them felt the need to chase it. Morgan leaned her head on his shoulder. I had a call with a venture team in Berlin this morning. They offered to buy out my remaining shares in Orla Tech. Patrick didn't answer right away. Do you want to take it? I told them no, and then I told them why. He looked down at her. You ready to walk away from it all? If I were walking away, she said, maybe, but I'm not. I'm stepping into something better. A pause passed between them, thick with meaning. Patrick reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. She sat up. What's that? He handed it to her. I had this made before the wedding, but I didn't want to give it to you until the build was done. She opened the envelope and pulled out a deed. Her fingers trembled as she read the name, Morgan Orla Langley, her eyes lifted to his, blinking fast. This is our garage, he said. In both our names, partners, no loopholes, no exit clauses. Morgan stared at the paper. You know I'll still boss you around, right? I'm counting on it. She laughed, then leaned in and kissed him, not a soft, wistful kiss, but one rooted in everything they'd built with calloused hands and late nights. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. I want to do something for you, she said. You already gave me everything. Not this. 2 days later, Patrick stood in the middle of a massive, dusty lot in Brooklyn, staring at her rusted frame on wheels and a sheet-covered shape parked beneath a tarp. The skyline loomed behind them, but his focus was on the shell of a car that looked like it hadn't moved since the 70s. What am I looking at? He asked. Morgan pulled off the tarp. A '66 Ford Mustang Coupe, original body, custom chassis. I bought it at a silent auction in Madrid 3 years ago and had it shipped here, never touched it. I was waiting for someone who'd do it justice. Patrick's mouth parted. You're giving this to me? No, she said. I'm giving it to us. It'll be our first full rebuild together. He walked around the car, hands grazing the frame. You sure? Positive. He looked up at her, the wind catching wisps of her hair. I've never rebuilt something that already had my heart in it. Morgan stepped closer. Then let's start with this. That summer passed in flashes. Late nights under hanging bulbs in the garage, Emmett handing them tools and asking questions that made them laugh until their ribs hurt. The smell of oil and citrus from the lemonade Morgan insisted on making from scratch. They worked side by side, their hands stained with grease, their clothes ruined, and their hearts completely finally unburdened. One night after the bolts were tightened and the final coat of paint had dried, Patrick stood in front of the finished car, arms crossed, trying to hide the emotion rising in his throat. Morgan slid an arm around his waist. She's beautiful. She's perfect, Patrick said. You did that. We did. He turned to her. You ever think about what's next? She raised an eyebrow. You mean after we finish this masterpiece? I mean after all of it, the garage, Emmett getting older. You and me. I think about it every time. I see you looking at him like you're scared he'll grow too fast. Patrick chuckled. That obvious? Only to someone who knows what it looks like to want more. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, hand-folded piece of paper. What's this? A list. She unfolded it. It was titled, Things We Haven't Done Yet. She read the first item aloud. Live on a coast, even just for a season, he nodded. I've never seen the Pacific, she grinned. Next summer, he pointed to the second item. Build something that doesn't need fixing, that one's about you. She looked up. You already fixed me. No, he said. You fixed yourself. I just stood in the blast radius. She kissed him then, and they laughed into it, their noses bumping, the kind of joy that didn't need polish or perfection because it was real. In the fall, they took Emmett on his first plane ride. Not on a commercial flight, on a private jet Morgan chartered under a different name to avoid press. They flew to a quiet stretch of coast in Oregon, rented a house with a garage just big enough for the Mustang, and spent 2 months living on clams, bonfires, and sand between their toes. Patrick taught Emmett how to whittle. Morgan taught him chess. And in the quiet mornings, Patrick would wake to Morgan curled beside him, the sun painting her skin in gold, and think, this is the life I didn't know to dream about. When winter came, they returned to New York. A year later, the Langley division rolled out a new line of diagnostic tools across 5 states. Patrick declined every TV interview, but Morgan took out a full-page ad in a national paper with a single quote from him printed in bold, "Fix what matters. Leave the rest." At the bottom, it read, Patrick Langley, director. And just like that, the man who used to drive a cab with a broken heater became a name that mattered in an industry that had forgotten men like him. One spring morning, Patrick found Morgan in the garage, her belly softly rounding beneath a faded concert tee. her hands tangled in blueprints that Emmett had doodled on while pretending to be her assistant. He slid his arm around her waist. "You're still working," she pressed a hand to her back. "I'm nesting, but in spreadsheets." He kissed her temple. "I like this version of nesting. Good, because it's all you're getting." They stood in the quiet hum of their world, surrounded by tools and dreams and a life neither of them had planned but both had chosen. When the baby came, they named her June. After the month, Morgan had walked barefoot into his cab and shattered everything he thought he knew about fate. And when the five of them, Patrick, Morgan, Emmett, June, and the garage, settled into a rhythm that felt like forever, it wasn't because they had everything. It was because they'd earned everything that mattered, brick by brick, kiss by kiss, choice by choice, together, always.